What is going on, you guys? Welcome to pre-meta predictions on the Cardfight Casual channel, and today I'm going to be taking you guys through the Narukami cards that have been revealed so far. So as with the poll I did, around 67 or 68 of you guys entered, and this is the result. Narukami was voted almost twice as much as the Oracle Think Tank cards, but rest assured, those of you who wanted to see the Oracle Think Tank cards, I'll do it as soon as more cards get released. Today is actually Friday, the 30th of November, the day before December starts. We're almost at the end of the year, and we're gonna get those cards in just a couple more weeks. So there's bound to be more cards released in just another week. Until then, we have the Narukami cards. For the TD cards, I'm not gonna go into so much detail, but if you guys want, I'll post a link to CMD, where I got all my information for Cardfight Vanguard as well as Freedom Duo. Check them out. They are two of the Singaporean YouTubers who do a lot of updates daily and weekly for the new cards that come out, and you guys can always head over there for translations. But starting off with the first card, we have Great Composure Dragon. He is the TD boss. I'm just going to run through a few of these. At the beginning of you or your opponent's battle phase, this unit gets plus 3000 power until the end of the turn for each rearguard in your opponent's which open rearguard circle in your opponent's front row. If it's your turn, it gets 5000 power instead of 3000 power. So a card that has an Excel marker and is good on Vanguard and rearguard. This card basically is a both defensive Vanguard and an offensive rearguard attacker and Vanguard attacker, so long as your opponent's front rows are empty. Now, for those of you who don't know, Narukami's whole deal is to bind cards in the front row, and so cards, there are plenty of cards that affect your opponent's front row, meaning that they are likely to have very few cards on your turn when you're attacking, making your big swings pretty good. So if you're facing off against a normal force or protect opponent, you have a good chance of getting that plus 10,000 power. Against Excel, you actually have an even higher chance. Because of their extra rearguard circle, you can actually take down some of their rearguards, and then giving you that extra 5k boost up to 20k reasonably for most Excel clans. Unfortunately, on your opponent's turn, it's not going to be that great, and because they will move units to the front. But the whole idea is to force your opponent to move units to the front or call units to the front, basically lining them up for the bind effects, reducing the size of the field, and if they keep on calling cards down to the field, they won't be able to call cards to hand. So I don't know why everybody was hating on this card so much, but I think it's a pretty good rearguard card and definitely a good backup boss to run. And even in the main decks, if you don't have to run the maximum number of grade 3s, the other two from the main BT03 set, which we'll be talking about going over later, it's a pretty good card. Anyways, it's a trial deck card, so pretty good. Not that impressive, but a very solid standard card. The next one is Duress Clap Dragon. He's not really good. He just allows you to move opponent's rear guards up and down the same column. So I'm just going to skip over him. Next up, we have Thunderstorm Dragoon, a card that isn't that impressive, but it does give you 5000 power if your opponent has one or less rearguards in their front row, which is likely the case if you're facing off against a force or protect opponent. But unfortunately, as the power increases just 5000 and it doesn't do any binding effects, you might not want to run this card. Because right up next, we got Recklessness Dragon, who has a on-call counter+1 bind a rearguard in opponent's front row, and it also gets 3000 power with the same condition if there are one or less rearguards in your opponent's front row. Yes, it's only a 3000 power, but usually if you put him on an Excel marker, you do get that 12,000 base, 22,000 on the Excel marker to hit big numbers. Or if he's on the rearguard, yeah, he doesn't hit the same 22 with a boost, with an 8k boost that Thunderstorm Dragoon does, but that extra bind definitely helps a lot. I can see him having a place in the main Narukami decks. Next up, we have Excess Street Dragon, which also on place gets Counter Blast and a Soul Blast 1. Choose one of your opponent's rearguards at the front row and bind it, and it gets 10,000 power if you bind that unit. It's only 8,000 power base, but this will be fighting with the spot for Reckless Dragon. For Soul Blast of one more, it's going to be pretty hefty cost because there are a few other cards that use Soul Blast, including this clan's Countercharger, so probably not going to see that much play. The power just doesn't seem that worth it. There's really not much else except for Lizard Soldier Riki. When placed, he gets Soul Blast 1, you get power plus 3000 to the end of the turn. You may swap all of your rearguards to the front row, your opponent's rearguards from the front row to the back row and back row to the front row. So this is really, really good if you have, if your opponent has something in the back row that you want to target but you can't. Riki would has helped to swap it around. And again, if they don't, if they didn't want to fill up the back row and you want those power boosts, you can just call him Soul Blast 1 and then become 11k booster or attacker, and then all of your opponent's front row rearguards move to the back row and you get that extra 5k or 10k bonus that you were looking for. A pretty good card, and I can see this guy being run as a 4-off or at least a 3-off in most decks. Pretty good so far. So those are pretty much all the TD cards. I'm just going to put a picture of all the other triggers on screen. And if you guys want to find out more in depth or read it for yourself, you can go on to CMD or Freedom Duo. Links are in the description below. Next, we're going to move on to the Miyaji Academy CF Club set BT03 coming out on the 14th of December or the 15th of January for Japanese and English respectively. We're going to jump straight in with the big bad VR for the clan. Now, a lot of people have mixed reviews about this. Personally, I don't think it's that bad. A lot of my friends seem to disagree. They think it's pretty trash. But for the skill, it is Counterblast 1 when it attacks. That means you have to choose this before the attack hits, or whether the attack hits or not. You have to do it before you attack, or when it attacks. So you don't know if your opponent's going to get a trigger. But you can choose a rearguard in your opponent's row, bind it. Then, if you choose to, discard the number of cards from your hand as the same number of the opponent's rearguards. And at the end of the battle, this unit gets to stand, it gets power plus 5k and drive -1. Now, a lot of people have mixed reviews because it's a large discard cost. If your opponent just has 2 rearguards, you have to discard 2 cards on top of a Counterblast 1. Of course, if your opponent has only 2 cards in the front row, Counterblasting 1 will bind one of those. So it's a on-attack bind, which is, again, pretty useful for a card that you want to have on your Vanguard circle most of the time. And at the same time, giving you an option, if your opponent decided not to flood the field, to discard a certain number of cards and stand and get 1 more attack. The main problem of this card, I do feel, is that the 5k just isn't enough. If it was 10k, maybe it'll be a bit easier to reach the threshold, but 17k against most 18k Vanguards just isn't going to cut it. With 1 trigger, it becomes 1 to pass, and you only have 1 drive check after that. And with the discard cost, most of the time will be outweighing the extra drive that you get from standing and attacking again. But that does bring us to the next card, the triple R from the set, Detonic Stinger Dragon. So this card works on Vanguard and Rearguard when placed. Counterblast 1, choose a Rearguard in your opponent's front row, bind it, and it gets plus 5000 power. A pretty good card. Again, vying for that spot in the grade 3 slots, but a really good card because it works Vanguard and Rearguard, getting that Counterblast and basically retiring a card in your opponent's front row. Do be noted that all these cards do contribute to Gear Chronicle's bind zone, so that is the only worry when facing off against Gear Chronicle, which should probably be not too bad a matchup because Gear Chronicle isn't very good when it gets rushed down. But its second and much more important and impressive and interesting skill is that when it's rolled upon, you can call this card to R, and this also counts as, you can also put it on the Excel marker that your new Vanguard just generated, making it a 22k attacker. And one of your Vanguards get power plus 10,000 until the end of the turn. Now this is really good for Detonic Dragon because of his skill. You really want to have a big power swing so that even if your opponent gets 1 trigger, they can still attack. Making that 27 threshold against your opponent, maybe 23 after 1 force marker. Again, something really good and really force your opponents to guard. Definitely run 4 of this card no matter which build of this deck you're playing, so I do think this is a pretty good card. I'm just gonna jump ahead past this triple R to go to Dragonic Kaiser Vermilion, the double R of the deck, and a card that everybody has been waiting for such a long time. A slightly less impressive double R instead of being a triple R or the main VR, but this card gets active once a turn. You can Counterblast 2. This unit gets power plus 5000 and 1 critical until the end of the turn. If there are 2 or more rearguards in your opponent's front row, instead of getting the crit plus 1, you do get to attack all the units in your opponent's front row in 1 attack, just like its old skill. And it's something that is very unique to Dragonic Kaiser Vermilion because he was the first one to do it, and again he's back with a whole front row attack. Now, of course, you wouldn't want to use this attack, the Counterblast 2, to attack the whole front row unless you had a full front row, which is pretty common for most clans who are wanting to give an all-out attack to Narukami to try to defeat them or to take down their opponent before they can rush you down themselves. But with that being said, your opponent also won't want to swing or call down many cards because you can bind them, and it's going to be a very painful thing for opponents to have to keep on replacing units in their front row over and over again, and of course the quality of units will slowly start to go down. Your opponent has only so many good attackers. Now, Dragonic Kaiser Vermilion's cost is pretty hefty with the Counterblast 2, and the critical isn't really important enough or good enough to push damage, and unfortunately that skill only works on the Vanguard. Of course, on the rearguard it would be a little bit too strong to have rearguards wiping out their opponent's entire row, and on an Excel column it would just be insanely powerful. But it also does require 10k boost to make it effective at wiping out rearguards, especially against Excel clans. It's going to be really potent. Murakumo, Pale Moon are all going to suffer because they really need their front row in order for their strategy to work out. that's where the Tonic Stinger Dragon comes in, and it's imperative that you ride this over the Tonic Stinger Dragon so that you do get the plus 10k, making your attack actually a formidable attack, 27,000, so your opponent has to drop money cards if they want to guard your Vanguard's attack, and of course with the Twin Drive. But also that the Vanguard is a formidable threat, so that, you know, people don't just like, oh, okay, I'll just, you know, take it. Of course, the minusing of the critical is the trade-off for the extra damage or the extra rear guards that you get to retire, but I think it's pretty good for wiping out your opponent's field. But do keep in mind that your opponent already won't have that many cards in the front row if they're playing a deck that isn't Excel, because they want to reduce the number of cards that are bound by your opponent, by you. But at the same time, there's a fine balance between giving your opponent power by playing less rear guards and giving your opponent more sacrifices by putting stuff out front. So it's a pretty threatening card. So we're going to jump right back up to the Dragonic Death Scythe, which is the RRR grade 2 for this deck. And even though it is a pretty iconic card, Dragonic Death Scythe, his Soul Blast cost is pretty questionable because it is, when placed Soul Blast 2, choose a rear guard in your opponent's front row and bind it, it gets plus 3000 power. It's another it's another 12k attacker on a rear guard circle, so that's not that good. But at the same time, the Soul Blast cost is pretty heavy because Soul Blast is going to be really tight because the countercharger for the deck is actually going to use Soul Blasts, which means that you really want to save those Soul Blasts, because you're really going to want to use those Soul Blasts to countercharge and use the Counter Blast to bind your opponent's rear guards. I think it's overall just better than if you decided to use the Soul Blast cost, even though the Dragonic Death Scythe also does get plus 5000 power if there are no rear guards in the same column, in the front row of the same column of this unit. So it does go up to hitting 17k on its own, 27 on the Excel rear guard circle, which you will probably have a good chance of getting the 27 power because your opponent is not going to have Excel circles all the time, and the opponents who do have the Excel circles will probably not want to put something there because you can just Soul Blast 2 on call and bind it. So it's a powerful card, but it does have that hefty cost. We'll have to see if there is a Soul Charging card, and if the Soul Charging card's Soul Charge abilities are good enough, we might see quite a few copies of this card. If not, I do think that this RRR is going to be one of those cards that are just kind of resigned to not being played very much. Next up, we're going back down to the double Rs. We have Rising Phoenix from the drop zone. If your opponent's rear guard is bound during your turn, you can call this card to R. If you do, this unit gets 3000 power till the end of the turn, making him an 11k boost, incredibly important number. Every 11k booster in this deck will be good because your opponent's Vanguard, if they are a Force Vanguard, they will have 13k based, and if they get a single damage trigger, they're going to get up to 23. And with 11k boosting a 12k, you hit that perfect 23 and you're still able to hit. Of course, that will say a little bit something about the triggers you want to be running. Probably want to be running more fronts for this deck because you do want all your rear guards to still be able to attack and hit once your Vanguard has attacked for those drive triggers. But this card is insanely good. He's a free 10k guard in your hand, and you can just call him back anytime, and he can be retired as many times as your opponent desires because you can just bring him back. In fact, it's a little bit of a counter to Kagero right here, and any of the other cards like Shadow Paladin that retire. We have Phantom Blaster Dragon. If you have 3 Rising Phoenix, sack all 3 of those Rising Phoenixes, send them to the drop zone, and then call something, bind your opponent's front row rear guard, and you get all 3 of them back. Just a really good card, a definite 4-off in the deck. Okay, so the last double R for the deck is of course going to be the double R Sentinel that will definitely be there as a draw trigger Sentinel to Perfect Guard, to fill up the Perfect Guard slot. So we're just going to jump ahead to the Dusty Plasma Dragon in the rear guard. Once a turn, when your opponent's rear guard is bound, the front and the back row gets plus 5000 until the end of the turn. So basically a plus 10k boost, which is going to be really good, but unfortunately it doesn't gain any extra power on its own. So even with an 11k, it's only going to be hitting 30k max on your attacking turn, and that's still pretty big and is bigger than most of the other columns. So it still remains to be seen if this card is good enough to make the cut. My guess is the power itself is not enough. Next, we have the Hammer Knuckle Dragon. For active ability, Counterblast 2, choose a rear guard and bind it, of course in the front row, and it gets plus 5000 power. A versatile card because you can use it from the Vanguard and the rear guard, and it's an active ability, but the heavy Counterblast 2 cost is going to make it probably less desirable because you want to save those Counterblasts for Vermilion and all the other cards that use Counterblast to bind. 2 is just too heavy of a cost. My guess is we won't see that many copies of this card being run. But probably one of the most important cards in the deck, we have Lightning of Hope Helena, the soul charger for the deck. Once a turn, when your opponent's rearguard is bound, you can, if you have no face-up cards in your damage zone, and this condition is very important, Soul Blast 1, Countercharge 1. So if you have a 1 card in your soul, you're going to want to use that to countercharge to get you another binding cost for one of the cards you can call on place, because that really heavy cost of Soul Blast 2 for Dragonic Death Scythe is going to drain the soul faster than you can fill it up, and just 2 Soul Blasts for one bind versus 1 Counterblast for 1 bind, it just seems like the math is there, even though it is a combo card and you need a few copies of him on the field, or to have to draw into him in order to use his ability. At the same time, he's a once a turn when you have no face-up cards in your damage zone, so it's going to be pretty hard to have more than 1 open counterblast, but there's a way to work around it, because if you have a few copies of him on the rearguard, his ability all procs at the same time. So for example, if you're swinging with the Tonic Drill Dragon with 3 of these in the rearguard, and you use up your last counterblast, and you bind your opponent's you bind your opponent's front row rearguard, immediately you have the condition that you have no face-up card in your damage zone, and I do believe you can Soul Blast 3 and Countercharge 1. I'm not sure if you have to activate them once at a time, which would be pretty painful, and if you guys do know that, please let me know in the comment section down below. But if you do get to Countercharge 3 for 3 Soul Blast, of course having 3 of these on field, then that would be a pretty good move. At the same time, we're going to look at Demolition Dragon, probably the best ride. As with all clans, there's a best grade 1 ride, and this is it. On the rearguard, if there are no rearguards in your opponent's front row, this unit gets plus 3000 power, 11k attacker, very essential like I mentioned. And on the Vanguard, when its attack hits a Vanguard, you can draw a card. So this card is really good to ride first turn to get that extra 1 draw, and it's really good to fuel the discard cost for the Tonic Drill Dragon. But unfortunately, this card is not really special in any other way. He probably will be good enough to play 3 or 4 copies of, just because 11k is going to be a really big number, but we'll have to see with the balance of all the cards whether anything more impressive comes out in the remaining time. But for the most part, those are all the big cards. The last one is just Tempest's Domineering Wyvern. When placed, you can choose one of your opponent's rearguards and move it to an open rearguard circle in the same column, and he gets plus 3000 power. This card is really not that impressive. It's a better grade 2 version of the grade 3 TD card that you can check out down below. But other than that, there's really nothing else to go through. We're about 2 weeks away for the Japanese edition of Miyaji's CF Academy release, and it looks like that's pretty much all for the cards for Narukami in this upcoming set. If there are any more impressive cards that will affect the metagame, I might do a short video on it. But for the most part, that has been pre-meta predictions with the Cardfight Casual channel. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys like this video, do give it a like, because it lets me know whether you want me to do more of this content. And like I said before, don't worry if you guys wanted the OTT version of this. I will be doing an OTT review probably in the week to come, or if I have more time at the end of this coming week when more cards are being revealed. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so leave a like down below if you enjoyed this video, and share this video. It really helps me to get the word out, and the extra support definitely helps to motivate me to make more videos, because of course this is not my job. I am just doing this as a hobby. But in the upcoming months, I'm going to be a little bit more free because I'm finishing my NS commitment. For those of you guys who don't live in Singapore, that's national service. It's a mandatory 2-year service period where you serve the country, join the Navy, Army or Air Force, and serve as soldiers. But once that's done in this coming January, I will have more time, and hopefully starting February, I'll be able to make more videos going over these kinds of reviews, and also going through some new cards, decks, and maybe going back to do episode reviews. I stopped because I really don't like the new anime, and I just couldn't bear to do a review every single week when I really didn't even want to watch the whole episode. But regardless, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Sharing it definitely helps. Check out the links below to Freedom Duo and CMD Network, 2 of the greatest websites. I've been following them for years. And yeah, so until the next video, have fun, and remember, it's okay to play casual.